Hello, let's talk to Michael Binyon OBE, leader writer from The Times, former foreign correspondent as well. An extraordinary story came across the desk here at Talk yesterday, where basically The Times were described as legitimate military targets by Dmitry Medvedev, a close ally of President Putin, deputy chairman of Russia's Security Council. He basically more or less threatened journalists from The Times. And some people said, is this some kind of declaration of war, some kind of hostilities being opened up on British journalists? Michael, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Shocking, this, when I read it yesterday. I was handed it just as I was standing outside the studio. And it was one of those where you sort of got to the second paragraph and went, sorry, what? He wants to make Times journalists military targets.
Yes, that's a bit alarming, I suppose. I've not had a price on my head before. And it's because he was very annoyed and angry about one of our editorial comments yesterday morning, which said that it was legitimate for the bombers to kill the general who has been accused of war crimes by originating the gas attack and the chemical weapons attacks in Ukraine. And clearly Medvedev was lashing out. I mean, he's turned into being a super hawk on behalf of Putin and is voicing the most extreme opinions, threatening all sorts of people, all sorts of things. First time he's threatened journalists. It's a bit far-fetched. It's a bit uncomfortable feeling you might have some lone wolf stalking you, on command from Russia. But I think we're pretty well protected in this country.
Well, you'd like to think so, but one of the things he said was, so be careful. After all, a lot of things happen in London.
Well, that's true, and things do happen, and various people get targeted for all sorts of reasons. But I think this is probably in keeping with Medvedev's habit of lashing out and issuing extreme threats. He, after all, has said before that Russia wouldn't hesitate to use nuclear weapons if there was attacks on the Russian motherland. Well, there have been attacks on Russia. There have been direct missile hits into Russia, and he hasn't yet, or at least the Russian military haven't yet used tactical nuclear weapons. So one never quite knows, whether this is just war talk or attempts to sort of bolster morale, or whether these are real threats.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of saber-rattling that goes on, a lot of propaganda as well, isn't there? A lot of it for domestic consumption, I suppose, in Russia.
Yes, indeed. Yes, certainly. And it's odd because Medvedev was a liberal. I mean, he was president for a while in that sort of odd time when Putin resigned, as he should do, after his first term. Medvedev came in as president. He tried to improve relations with the West. In fact, I actually interviewed him. He seemed very reasonable and personable when he came over to London for the 2012 Olympics. But since then, he's turned himself into a sort of arch hawk, a supporter of the Ukraine war, a cheerleader for Putin. And one wonders whether this is just an attempt to make sure he's not sidelined in the power struggle within the Kremlin.
No, quite. Because there was that weird period, wasn't there, when he and Putin seemed to be involved in a sort of occasional job swap, where he was president for a while, Putin was prime minister, then it would go back the other way, then it would go back the other way. I think it did it a couple of times, didn't they?
Yeah, well, he certainly did it once. I mean, he was prime minister when Putin... well, he was president when Putin was prime minister. But it was clear right from the start that the man with the real power was still Putin, because in a famous occasion, Putin sat in the big chair and Medvedev, who was then president, sat in a smaller chair beside him. And so you knew where the power was.
Right, absolutely right. So the Times obviously will take this seriously, but from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like they're too concerned.
Well, I mean, one can't worry about every single threat that's ever been made. I mean, we don't identify who wrote which editorial, but we'll take, presumably, collective responsibility. The editorials are anonymous because they're meant to represent the view of the paper, the view of the editor. And so it's ultimately, apparently, the editor's words that go into the editorial. But obviously, it's written by a team of editorial writers. And so we take collective responsibility for that.
Well, let's hope everything is fine and dandy, and we all have a very good Christmas. Because we just work upstairs, by the way, so I mentioned that in passing.
Yes, I shall sort of take different routes to work every time and look around as I go to work.
Yeah, watch out for the odd umbrella or the tube. Michael Binyon OBE, thank you very much indeed. Leading writer at The Times, former foreign correspondent, of course, as well, who formerly interviewed Medvedev, who has now been described by David Lammy as a gangster, basically.